Interventionism with the OSCE, which is the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and it is a regional grant to intergovernmental organizations comprising of member states in Europe, North America, and Asia. Its mandate is issues such as arms control, promotion of human rights, freedom of the press, and free fair elections, as well as making US territories. And so, thanks for that introduction. And hopefully, I'm sure it'll be a bit different to what we usually do here, but I'll go back and we'll bring the speakers. That's that. I'll just do something a bit different. I'm going to introduce the speakers first. So, on proposition on this side, we have Paul Cool, right? And he is Andorran from Andorra, I was told. That's cool. And we have Jack Palmer, he's a neck. And we have Oisin Moore, who's not as posh as what he seems. And then on opposition, we have Lucia. That's her. Cool. She's Slovenian and 27, which is insane. And also being nice people, so yeah, really nice. Great. Tom Coleman, Senator for Trinity, and he's great. So
that's just me, just a clarify.
And then we have Anna. So I'm usually more comfortable like up here doing like some jokes, but I just felt like the nature of this today. I'm not really going to go, ceasefire, very annoying. I'm a pastor, and I'm like the most eloquent person to introduce like a topic like this. So I'll just like leave what I do know and hope it's relevant. So I know where I'm going, so I don't have to get it, so bear with me. So the Iliad is the foundation of Western civilization. It's like the corpus of Western literature, which everything within the West our culture comes from, is based upon. And its first words are, I'm going to try to speak ancient Greek. Bear with me. Mena ela theo telea geo cleos ulumene ignoria caio salga teca polasitimo sorcas arni cleapsum corona posteloria tuchucanesum by noises casi dios et leacto use exudeta foca diastita interessante trace anaxantron by dios etileos. That basically means wrath, same gods of wrath and killers. And I had a lecturer once tell me that teaching the course on the Iliad, he had a student get up and say how awful and how perverse it is that the foundation of what the West based itself on begins with the word wrath, essentially being violence, the wrath of Achilles, and like all the souls that went to hell because of it. And it is rather fitting because unfortunately we do live in a world in which kids can go to school and come home in a body bag, and the parents in Palestine are considered lucky if they can break their child whole. Well, I've always kind of been someone who rejects doomism. I don't think it's helpful. I think it's not worth giving it that much consideration when you don't look towards the end. And if you do look towards the end of the Iliad, it ends not with a confrontation or battle. It ends after Achilles has refused to join the field of war and his soulmate, Patroclus, was killed. He refused to fight in the battle until he lost him. And after Patroclus had been killed, he took to the battlefield and killed Hector, the Prince of Troy, and desecrated his body. And the Greeks were big on a lot of things, chief among them being women and desecrating bodies. And desecrating bodies. And Achilles, in his anger and childishness, kept the body in his tent. Until Priam, the old king of Troy, came to Achilles' tent and said, I'm going to do what no man on earth has done before, get on my knees and kiss the hand of he who killed my son. And with that, they sat down and they had dinner together. And for the first time in the foundation of Western literature, peace was had between two people who were against each other. And someone who really does think that, I'm not trying to be a hippie like this is still homer, like this says stuff don't fight. But I do think words can make a difference. I'm not arrogant enough to think that my words are going to do that. But I do know 20 years ago, a man by the name of Michael Longley wrote a poem in the hopes that it might change someone's mind that mattered. And the poem had a big enough impact that it is fair to say that it helped end the released a note called Ceasefire, and it goes, put in mind of his own father and moved to tears. Achilles took him by the hand and pushed the old king gently away. But Priam crawled up at his feet, wept with him until her sadness filled the building. Taking Hector's corpse into his own hands, Achilles made sure it was washed, and for the old king's sake laid out in uniform, ready for Priam to carry. Wrapped like a present home to Troy at daybreak. When they had eaten together, pleased them both, just stared at each other's beauty as lovers might. Achilles felt like a god, Priam good looking still, and full of conversation with earlier inside. I get down on my knees, and I do what must be done, and kiss Achilles' hand because of my son. The Good Friday Agreement ended the troubles in Northern Ireland, and the 10th of April 1998, and it was on no side, it's a collaboration that brought it apart. But I pray people who lost on both sides, like people agreed to let the person who killed their child come out of prison in the sake of peace. 3,500 people were killed during the Troubles, and over 47,500 countless lives impacted. And the fact that a man in Northern Ireland could read a book written over 4,000 years ago and see enough resonance in it that he thought that it might be able to sway someone to our against the mind, I think it says a lot that what we are built upon isn't wrath or violence, but it ends with putting aside your own pride and ego and understand that an eye for eye will never bring your son back because they're gone, and all I can do is stop more sons being killed. So I hope I did a good job of sincerity, so I hope your guys' words might make a difference here today. Thanks.
True and accurate record of the last public business meeting. There being none, I shall duly sign. Everyone is welcome here today to the University Philosophical Society. The motion that stands before us this House has no faith in Western interventionism. Standard orders are as follows. Speeches are a maximum of 7 minutes for student speakers and 10 minutes for guest speakers, 10 minutes being the upper limit, so don't feel stressed. After the first minute and before the last minute of each speech will be signified by a bell. Speakers from opposing sides and audience members are free to offer points of information. We encourage general audience participation during our debates. If you hear something you like, you can shout "hear, hear," and if you hear something you don't like, you can shout "no." We prioritise respect during our debates, and as a result, if anyone has any concerns about what is said tonight, our senior member of council, David Kelly, will be around at the reception all evening and is contactable via email at smc@tcdphil.com, and alternatively, the President, Anika Romani, is contactable via president@tcdphil.com. Without further ado, I will introduce the speakers for tonight's debate. Speaking in proposition, we have Paul Bartolome Arnay, Jack Harmer, and Oisin Ward. Tom Clonan and Mohammed Sayed Anwar. Paul to open for side proposition and debate as a whole. Hear, hear.
Thank you. I am Overcome, member of the Parliament of Andorra. Let me start by saying how grateful I am to be part of this meeting, this debate. Of course, it is a tremendous privilege to be here in one of Europe's leading academic institutions. The contemporary international order is under practice. Human rights have never been so contested. Multilateral institutions have never been so divided, and our peoples have never been so whole. Dear colleagues, the global order is under crisis. That might be an inconvenient truth for some. It is, however, a call for actions for all. Rousseau once said that war broadly affects civil coexistence. War broadly affects civil coexistence. In this regard, it is my belief that most of the instability that we see today in some regions of our world, I think that should be regarded as an example of Rousseau's axiom. That is, Western unlegitimate interventionism has infected international coexistence with greed and violence. Dear colleagues, our world is falling apart and we need to do something about it. The more we wait, the more devastating will be the consequences. So where do we start? Of course, revising all major transformations that have marked our world over the last decades goes well beyond the scope of this debate. Nevertheless, some premises must be cleared in order to understand where we find ourselves at. The Great World Wars gave the world a bipolar construction. On the one hand, the West united around a genuine conception of fundamental rights, democracy, and free trade. On the other hand, many socialist republics, grouped under the leadership of the Soviet Union, defended a slightly different view of our world. That bipolarity was gradually consolidated until the end of the 20th century, a moment of deep social, political, and economic transformation that altered our world. As a matter of fact, over the last 3 decades, the world has shaped its structure, paving the way for a more multipolar world. In this new context, the West must not concede any of the victories accomplished over the last century, particularly in the field of human rights, rule of law, and democracy. At the same time, the West cannot avoid any longer a more urgent task, namely the need to promote the inclusion of non-Western countries in the current international order. The main reasons are following. The first phase, because different organizations that rule the world have proved to be unable to maintain the global order today. There are many examples that must be remembered, especially in Ukraine, especially in Palestine, and elsewhere. The case is that the proliferation of new regional conflicts and growing tensions with Ukraine and China illustrate how unstable our world has turned. Also, non-Western countries feel underrepresented and disregarded by international organizations such as the Council of Europe or the United Nations. And they therefore reject our supranational directives. So, my argument disagrees with the notion of Western interventionism as a necessity. In other words, I do not believe in the idea that Western interests and values should be applied by everyone as the only way to promote global peace and stability. From my perspective, the idea that attributes a paternal role to the West is behind current global crisis, and therefore it must be disregarded, and that is not why. First, I think that diversity has always been the engine of human unity. That is, we humans tend to form groups of people in which we assume that our interests, preferences, or identity will be protected. The more inclusive our group is, the bigger it will be. As a matter of fact, the notion of unity in diversity has produced many positive results for mankind. I'm thinking of the creation of the United Nations, the Council of Europe, even the OSCE. It is my belief that these organizations were born out of a place where diverse national identities could be promoted. Second, I think that standardization endangers global stability as minorities feel neglected. For this reason, the West can no longer perceive the rest of the world as an extension of its sovereignty. The international sphere should rather be a place where human common good is defined. And to be honest, it is quite obvious that our common good, our human common good, goes well beyond the scope of our interest, the Western interest. On top of that, one cannot avoid to mention the fact that at present the West is no longer a unified political area. Increasingly, we see discussions and divisions that reflect a strong polarization of the region. That is especially the case in the field of geopolitics, as the war in Ukraine and Palestine reflects a partial consensus among Western countries on how these wars should be addressed. It is also the case in the NATO, where there is an ongoing debate about who's truly responsible for our defense. And that is even the case in the UN, where many Western countries are uncomfortable about the distribution of seats within the Security Council. So, what is my conclusion? First, before promoting further interventionism, the West needs to open a process of self-redefinition with the objective of setting the main foundations of our future. Second, multilateralism remains as the only road we know towards global peace and stability. Therefore, in order to protect our multilateral institutions, we need to promote the representation of all regions, and consequently, the prominent role that the West plays in the world should be to it. Third, we must not be afraid of the different national visions about democracy. As I truly believe that recognizing fundamental rights as our red line, we can still learn a lot from non-Western political traditions, and therefore, these non-Western conceptions of democracy can also inspire international organizations. Four, the international order must be based on the basis of pacific coexistence, territorial integrity, and international law. In this regard, Western interventionism should be transformed into effective interregional cooperation. To do so, I think that regional integration should be promoted, such as the EU has proved to be a very successful political example. Then the West united can have legitimate discussions with other regional institutions, such can be the African Union, such can be the OEA, such can be the ASAP. 5, unity against external threats constitutes the engine of nation building. When the West intervenes abroad without legitimacy, rather than bringing peace, it reinforces intolerance, it reinforces violence, it reinforces totalitarianism. So, I think that we can all agree that the reason represents the basis of justice. And there is no greater reason than recognizing that our Western rational, might not be universal. We in the West have for too long been used to the perception that our rational is a universal truth. To succeed in the future, we must go back to our humble roots and recognize that sometimes we can be wrong. In other words, the world needs more checks and balances that protect itself from Western stubbornness. And dear colleagues, for all these reasons, no, I have no faith in Western intervention.
Welcome everyone. It brings me special joy to see young people elect to debate in their free time. Like, democracy is alive. I'm so happy to be here. Is this microphone? Oh, it is. So, as was mentioned, I'm from Slovenia. So, I'm not really used to being labeled as West. Like, the closest I get to West is in the global context. But usually, we are, at best, from the Western perspective, central, but frequently East. So, I will be today presenting my views on why I do have faith in Western intervention in the world, and why I think we need to have faith in something for the future. So, first, 2 points of clarification. When we're talking about the timeline of intervention I want to be very clear because I think our history is long, full of abuses, and when we're talking about interventionism today, in my view, we're not talking about colonialism in those times, but mostly in the time frame after World War II, where we know certain elements are still existing that need to be addressed, but we are not talking about justifying colonial practices, which are of course not in line with Western or democratic practice. The second is the form of interventionism. One of the first things we think about is usually military force, military presence, but intervention can take place in different forms, and especially when we're talking about Western values, we must not disregard those. For example, election monitoring, other practices of community building, community strengthening that can allow for development, especially in the form of democratic development. Sure, let's take it. I wish I could not.
How is community development done on the ground?
Okay, I'm not going to get into that, but actually I will touch upon that. When I say that those are the forms that we should be considering, I'm not saying that we consider them, or that was the US, was considering them, or implementing them in the correct course in the past. Actually, one of my key arguments will be that in order to have faith in Western intervention in the future, we need to use our model, which is democratic, to learn from the past and change our practices in the future. And some of the key of those are how to better understand communities that we are working in. But as I mentioned, we must have faith in something. It's always easiest to say, I don't have faith in this. I'm in the coalition party in politics, so I've been in charge of bringing up the solutions. And that is always more challenging than turning things out. So I believe that we must have faith in something. So let's look at the alternatives, so we may be a bit more optimistic about what we have to work with in the scope of Western ideologies. So alternatives. I'm not a historian, so I will not take you through specific examples, but I am a lawyer. So I wanted to look at the two biggest alternatives we have from the legal perspective. First is China. We have one political party. We have direct elections at local levels, but let's not forget one political party. And then indirect elections to the National Congress. We have the Communist Party, which is enshrined in the Constitution. We have a president that has been reigning since 2013. The other big opponent, big alternative, Russia. We have a president since the year 2000, with some periods in between. Crucially, a change in legislation that allows this president to continue being president for 2 more terms, and those of 6 years, not 4 years, as it was previously enshrined in the Constitution. And if we look at the way these leaders are dealing with political opponents, we might just think of the death of Navalny for one picture of how political opponents are handled. So I believe that one key element is that which gives us hope within this Western line of thought, that there is enough merit to spread it throughout the world, of course, while learning and improving our practices. And that's democracy. Unlike the others, we have an opportunity to have leaders which reflect the majority of what our populations want. And these systems are not perfect. We can, if we start rating, we can find faults with different democratic processes. However, they are a lot more resilient to what people want than autocracies, where that conversation cannot take place. Yes?
Those exactly you mentioned, China and Russia, they both have like
but that doesn't mean that we should stop fighting for its key values, because the alternatives are said, in my view, not acceptable. So, yes.
So although in Western countries our leaders are receptive to what citizens want, you give alternatives to power squares to become hegemonies. The West does not have to respond to the desires of other countries. So does it have potential to become a hegemon when it intervenes?
Why would the West not have to respond to desires of other countries? I'm not saying that. I actually think that in order to sustain interventionism, which can be successful, and there are examples in which it can be, we must keep reforming the system so that it will also be more responsive to those other powers that you are mentioning, like the reform of the Security Council, so it can be more effective. However, that does not mean that values such as democracy are not values worth spreading. Values such as equality, equal opportunity are values not worth spreading. If those are not key components that we seek to make available throughout the world, then we might find ourselves in a situation where another world power will change our systems in a way that we will not be able to exercise these rights which we have today, and they will not think twice. That's my conclusion.
Thank that speaker for their very fine speech, and invite Jack to continue the case for their side.
I'll do my best. Lara, aged 9, who survived Sarajevo, once narrowly surviving a bombing due to heading home early from playing outside, later said, "We played to distract ourselves from the war. Then our playground was gone, and my sister was too." I understand why people have faith in Western interventionism. Stories like Lara's are, of course, powerful. I want to believe in a world where benign and righteous actors carefully ensure that no one suffers from the brutal realities of war and genocide. I wish we could successfully spread positive values across the world. However, the sad fact is that now more than ever, any such faith in Western interventionism is unfortunately mere folly. Any such faith is folly because Western interventions are arbitrary. There's a famous story, according to Gail Sheehy, a reporter in the US, that after the Lewinsky scandal became public, Bill and Hillary Clinton didn't talk outside of public events in their party for 8 months because Hillary refused to do so, until one evening she called him and at length encouraged him to intervene in Kosovo immediately. The next day he summoned NATO. Obviously that shows that, of course, there was other reasons to intervene, but the correlation of events there is in itself bizarre. And the fact is that one of the reasons why our interventions are arbitrary is because the only capacity we have to intervene is through political structures, and politicians can themselves sometimes be arbitrary. Sometimes your wife is mad at you because you cheated very publicly, and is calling you and telling you to do something. But even aside from that, because it's through political structures, that also means the incentives on where we intervene and not are also arbitrary. We question ourselves to intervene and not to intervene, to let children suffer the slings of thousands of bombs, or actually, this one isn't our ally, we don't care. That's the way it's been structured again and again and again. And the ultimate reasons for this is that our interventions are arbitrary because the West is amoral. We pretend to think we care about certain things, but overall as a society, most people don't know or don't care. Most people don't care because they're busy. We have incredibly individualistic lives, and they're working from paycheck to paycheck, and that's fair enough to not care. And you know that people who are in relative positions of luxury don't go out and educate themselves, don't think about what's happening to other people, so they don't act on anything.
Moreover, we're sadly turning inwards. Even some people who do seem to care about things want to instead opt for protectionism, for shutting borders, rather than thinking about anyone at all, let alone sending troops or sending any positive efforts, or sending money abroad where it needs to go in many instances. And the core reason for this is that education is lacking, both on history and current affairs. If people were to weigh up whether or not we should intervene in Haiti right now, they would need to know the structure of how Haiti was deliberately deprived after its slave revolt and independence, and then also currently we need the current affairs of how barbecue came to power and its different warlords. But no one knows that. I do a lot of university debating. People who have won top university debating competitions don't know any of that. And they're people who are actively engaging all the time. I'm sure politics students don't know any of that. So how are we meant to weigh up whether we should engage in the current situation or not if we don't know the history and thus the likely response from how they're going to feel about the West stepping into their country, or even sending support in any way we do, or we don't know how to engage well if we don't know the intricacies and the nuances of the current affairs going on. And I'm not saying no one knows this. I'm sure a lot of politicians in this room do actually know this stuff, the actual experts. But the fact is that people on the street don't know. The people who you need to convince that it's politically viable to enter and intervene into a place, they don't know. And you know, we could say, well, the media is sort of. But the fact is that the media, now more than ever, is incapable, right? It's not going to tell us about what's going on in Haiti or Congo. Sure, it may tell us about Palestine. That's just because it happens to be related to one of the West's allies. It may tell us about Ukraine. That's just because it's like literally beside us all. And with that, instead, it doesn't say those things. Nothing about Sudan, nothing about Congo, not that much about Haiti. But it's really, really important that you know about toilets and bike sheds and whether or not they're eating dogs and cats in Ohio. It's once they focus on these sensationalist stories, because if it doesn't, the media dies, and they want to pretend that they're doing a good job broadly, so they still do a lot of sensationalist politicians won't swear, to keep their profits going. And the fact is that it means we end up as a populace being blind. So this all means that we don't know where to intervene and when to intervene or how to intervene. And even if we do overcome all of that, we're ultimately unwilling to sacrifice. Because even if the focus of intervention is correct, even if Hillary does call Bill Clinton and stop the absolute massacres occurring in Kosovo, as it was good for her to do, Bill Clinton and the Secretary of State do a calculation, see how many US troops would die if they did a ground force to stop the slaughter, decided, that's too many of our boys, let's carpet bomb Serbian cities instead. And then what you have is instead of soldiers dying, you have civilians dying, just more civilians dying. And crazy, I was actually in Belgrade this summer, and I saw a graffiti up on the main town square saying the only genocide in the Balkans was against the Serbs. Laughable, crazy, but that's what they think is they're a carpet bomb because the West wants to sacrifice too many good US soldiers. And you end up in situations where you now have increasing tensions in Republic of Srpska and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we might risk even more conflict going on. That's because even if we overcome all these obstacles, we don't want our own people to die. And even if we are willing to let our own people die, and we want to try to do it as democratically as possible, it proves difficult to maintain these relations, because people have different values. The idea of whether or not you're actually putting in a government and supporting a good government, or engaging in a neo-colonial project, is something that people on the ground may feel one way or another about, and we can all go back in your face as it has done in Afghanistan. So, overall, look, I really, really do want to believe in intervention. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing that a whole generation of women had access to education in Afghanistan?
It's, yeah, you're weighing up one actual world with an imagined world where we don't know what happens. Because we don't know exactly what could have happened if the Taliban were in place, and we also don't know going into the future just how much longer the Taliban will be in place now due to the US intervention and what's going on into the future with that. I think there are obviously times where it's good, but the long-run effects prove bad, and the fact is that there's other situations where we refuse to intervene even when we obviously should. Because yes, we stopped the slaughter in Bosnia and Kosovo, but we're not stopping the slaughters going on right now all around us. In fact, we're funding it instead. So I want to believe in mass interventions. I wish this opposition could convince me to join in their faith. However, until we mature past our amorality, until we engage in the self-definition Paul described, and ensure future interventions aren't arbitrary, any such faith is folly. Thank you.
Thanks very much to my
I just want to make a statement. Senator Luan has a very distinctive laugh. What is an intervention? What is it? So I asked Senator Luan at the OSCE meeting in Vienna earlier this year, I said, how come I'm not part of the young parliamentarians? And Senator Luan said, because you have to be under 40, Tom. Cue the distinctive laugh. But I think that was an intervention. So I just want to begin by saying that there is a context to what we're talking about today. As we speak, Israeli troops are moving north towards the Litani River, and the casualties they're inflicting on Lebanese men, women, and children are indiscriminate and almost without parallel. Over 1,000 innocent Lebanese men, women, and children have now been slaughtered. It is exactly the same casualty rate as was inflicted and is continuing in Gaza to innocent Palestinians. So, do I have faith in Western intervention? Well, I don't have zero faith in it, but ladies and gentlemen, I have little faith in it. So I just want to take you on a little journey. If we think in terms of cultural history, moral and ethical epochs, the Egyptian period, 4,000 years, we're raced through it. The Greek period, 2,000 years. The Roman period, 1,000 years. What do you notice? Each one is halving. Each period of human development has a half-life. The Dark Ages, 700 years. The Renaissance, 350 years, give or take. The Reformation, 150. The Age of Enlightenment, 100. The Age of Modernity, when we moved from the Gemeinschaft, of the rural, family-based system, to the Gesellschaft of the city and the city-state, of which we are representatives of its democratic, inverted commas, outputs. The modern period ended in 1945 with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where human beings, the only creature capable of moral conscience and altruism, demonstrated its ability and willingness for mass destruction. Those two devices, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, were about 100 kilotons. The weapons in the hands of Vladimir Putin, possibly Donald Trump, the Israelis, are many, many thousand megatons. So, if the age of modernity ended in 1945, we are, I suppose, in the era of post-modernity. But if you look at the metrics, the era of post-modernity ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall coming down. We are now in a new period for which moral philosophers, historians have not come up with a name. And I would say it is the period of intervention, the period of the preemptive strike. So I want to share a little experience with you. I came to Trinity 40 years ago from Finglas, and I graduated, and I joined Oblique Nahara, our army, and I went to the Middle East as part of a classic Cold War Western intervention to Lebanon in 95 and 96, the winter of 1995. And in that winter, Hezbollah, under the direction of Sheikh Nasrallah, escalated their attacks on the Israeli positions in our area of operations. And when we went out of control, as Irish troops, as a neutral country, with no imperial footprint in the Middle East, the children used to come out from the villages and run alongside the armoured personnel carriers, looking for chocolate, looking for dollars, looking for yogurt that we had in our ration packs. And when Hezbollah began to inflict casualties on the Israelis, they mounted a punitive operation against the people of South Lebanon called Operation Grapes of Wrath. They declared all of Lebanon a free fire zone, and they slaughtered hundreds of innocent men, women, and children in the villages that we patrolled. And it culminated in a massacre of civilians in our neighbouring UN position at Kona, we spent 2 months, night and day, going to the bombed out houses, houses that had been collapsed by missile strikes, air strikes, helicopter gunship attacks, taking out the bodies of whole families, children, grandparents, infants. And what is the effect of high explosives? Limb separation, burns, the shockwave pulps internal organs, shatters bones. There was one little girl, and she had a little t-shirt on her, une belle histoire, and she was covered in dust. And her family, only 48 hours previously, had run out to greet us and take food from our ration bags. That's Western intervention in this new period after postmodernism. At the time of the massacre of Kwana, a relatively unknown Islamist extremist called Osama bin Laden declared a fatwa on the United States based on the events of Kwana. And in his fatwa, if you read it, he refers specifically to the massacre of innocent Lebanese children, men and women in Kwana, in Lebanon. And 4 years later, Mohammed Atta and others flew planes into the Twin Towers and into the Pentagon and elsewhere. In response, George Bush announced the global war on terror and invaded Afghanistan in October of 2001. The United States then invaded Iraq, and decapitated the regime of Saddam Hussein, the preemptive strike, the new mode of intervention where we tear up the rule books and we abandon international law and the laws of armed conflict. And what happened? Millions have died. We have millions of people, the largest migration and flight of refugees since the Second World War. And we feel it here. When you walk around this city, our guests in the OSCE Parliament, you'll see people in doorways under canvas who are fleeing, seeking international protection. And what has happened? With the intervention in Iraq, the Americans have no influence there. They're influenced by Tehran. There's a Shia access or arc of influence from Tehran through Baghdad, through Damascus in Syria, to Beirut on the Mediterranean coastline. Putin, Iran's principal military ally, has benefited from this. In Afghanistan, we have 17.5 million women and girls who are now oppressed. Afghan women are not permitted to sing to their children. The consequence, anticipated or unanticipated, hypothetical or antithetical, of Western intervention. So these are the some, if you like, the moving parts of Western intervention in this century. And what do we call it, if not postmodernism? I call it an existential threat to our existence as a species. And what is that threat? Well, I'll tell you, it is the very distillation of patriarchy and toxic masculinity. I call it the 3 A's: airstrikes, austerity, and assholes, like Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un. The intervention we need now to survive as a species and to save the planet is to empower women and girls all across the globe. We need an alternative to patriarchy. That is the only intervention that is going to work. Because we've had a couple of thousand years of the old patriarchy, not working great, I would argue. So I just conclude by saying that whilst I don't have zero faith in Western intervention, I have little faith in it. And I believe that the future, if we are to survive as a species, is female.
And on that note, I would say Trinity graduates to be, and those who are postgraduates, vote for women. Vote for Lynn Rowan in the coming general election. And in our huge surplus, give me a number 2.
Ladies and gentlemen, Western intervention is not about morality, it's not about the US and NATO's role. I mean, let's be frank, it's not about the US's so-called duty as the police of the world with NATO following at their tail. It might have been back in 1945 when the US took up this role and had such power. It might have been about morality then. It might have been about a duty to free those who are oppressed the world over, but has long ceased to be about that. The UN interventions are not Western interventions. They are whole world, they are global interventions. The Western interventions in Tom's story was indeed the US arming Israel with the bombs that killed those children. A lot of today's discussion is focused on Western interventions in the Middle East. Afghanistan, Iraq, the sanctions on Iran, Western support on Israel, on previous wars and military interventions. There were mentions of Kosovo. Surprisingly, no one mentioned Vietnam. I think that discussions about such things create a certain level of murkiness and subjectivity. Ziad told us about the generation of women in Afghanistan who gained education due to the US invasion there. He did not happen to mention in Iran how many generations of women lost education when the US installed the Shah and they came under Sharia law, or indeed how it was anti-Soviet Union intervention from the West that funded the Mujahideen and allowed the Taliban to come to power in Afghanistan, causing generations of girls to lose out and us to get to the situation that we have today. The important question you must ask yourself is, if you believe not only that the West are intervening in good faith, but also that the outcome is better for everybody than it otherwise would have been. To claim that you have faith in Western intervention, you are saying that while Bush and Blair may have known that the evidence of WMDs in Iraq was unreliable at best, that they pushed ahead with the invasion of Iraq because they thought that the abuses of Saddam were so bad that it had to be removed. And that you have to think that they succeeded with making the lives of everyone involved so significantly better that it was worth more than 1 million Iraqi lives and the complete destabilization of the region. Firstly, there is so much evidence on the country to have not had your faith rattled by this requires serious devotion to the cause and also a lot of cognitive dissonance. But secondly, it is important to remember the political context of these interventions. Western governments use the fears and heartbreak of the aftermath of 9/11 to murky things, to spin, to create belief of better intention. They played on post-McCarthy hatred of communism to justify the war in Vietnam. On top of this, it is easier to sell the danger of these regions due to their proximities to the alternatives, as we heard from the opposition, their proximity to Russia, their proximity to China. They also convinced people somehow that Al-Qaeda were also in Iraq. Obviously, that wasn't true. More importantly, I think a lot of the holistic context of today's debate goes about morality, of feeling oppressed, of freeing oppressed people. And clear if we're able to look at the Western interventionism that have come without these spin, this propaganda, this fear of the alternatives. And that kind of propaganda that shapes media narratives and distorts perception of bigger picture reality. Therefore, I think it would be prudent to look at what is often an ignored region within regards to Western interventionism. Partially because with the arbitrary way we look at the world where we Europeans centre ourselves in it, and that they are geographically to the west of us, but also partially because they are never considered powerful in the same way, or scary in the same way Russia and China are. And I'm of course talking about South and Central America. When you look at the list of interventions there, the number of democratically elected, all of the values that we try to spread, of democracy, of freedom, the number of democratically elected governments who are overthrown in South America by the US and instead who will install dictators who are simply more malleable to the US leaders, more in line with US policy, and more likely to do whatever they want. At the same time, these people were much more likely to commit genocide. You're talking about, or to, at the very least, horrible acts against their people. If you look at Chile, the democratically elected socialist leader Salvador Allende was overthrown for Pinochet to come to power. Pinochet was called a good friend by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. He also killed thousands of people in his country. He had such horrible economic policies that devastated the entire country and left just a few people at the top. That is Western interventionism, ladies and gentlemen, plain and simple, without any spin. That is what it is right there. We can have no faith in Western interventionism as it stands. You have to think about Western interventionism, as was said, not just about militarily. You also have to remember that the IMF and the World Bank are Western institutions who hand out loans to developing countries who are with a lot of people on the brink of starvation. And these loans are tied to conditions that allow Western corporations to reap the resources of these countries, who prevent these countries from ever being able to develop their own sustainable economy. These are not the values that the opposition tell you we are spreading, but they are the reality of what happens. We have no faith in Western interventionism because whilst wars may continue without it is so often the West who choose the winner, and never has the winner they have chosen been an ordinary person. However, folks, place your faith in something that fails so much more than it succeeds, that actively takes so many lives, but with no signs of learning from its own mistakes, that unfortunately is a long past dream. It is only when we agree that we have lost faith in Western intervention may we move away from a select UN Security Council and desire to be part of NATO, and perhaps then we may find the dream the opposition has put forward, the dream where women are free from oppression, the dream where democracy and equality are spread throughout the world. It is only then, when we have lost faith in the West and the West way of rule, that we can actually move forward together as a globe. Thank you.
and yet the economic situations in Venezuela are probably worse than a lot of places where the economic situations were created by the US. And so it's very hard to have this conversation about whether or not Western intervention has led to good or bad in these instances, because it's hard to conceptualize what exactly would have happened absent it, whether or not a worse leader could have come about, whether or not the person who won the tenuously claimed to be democratic election within Iran would have consolidated power aggressively or not, or given people rights or not. And so I think all that sort of discussion is, by the by, hard to do. What I'm going to talk about then is why it's important to continue to have faith in the concept of Western intervention. And I think the first prominent speaker makes this case for me to an extent, because they talk about why it's hard for the West to intervene, given that we are often incredibly divided. I think in some instances it's probably good. I think it's good when we have an incredibly complicated conflict that it's hard to intervene in, because it's hard for us to have like a stance that we all agree on, or unanimously agree that this is probably the correct thing to do. But I think there are also instances where there are conflicts that are substantially clear, where we can tell that there is a right or wrong, where we can tell that the action that an aggressor is taking, the violation of sovereignty they're engaging in, is incredibly bad, and we should do something. The problem is that we are still divided in these instances, because a lot of people believe what propositions tell you. They believe that Western intervention is intrinsically bad, that we shouldn't have faith in it, that it's not going to work, that we can't do anything, that all it can do is make things worse. If you're right, if you're why, I'm not going to take it down. And so, in those instances, I think what we should know is that when we have faith in Western intervention, that is when we take the prerequisite steps to actually engage in it, to actually think about the best way to approach these situations. Jack talks about how people often lack education on these specific things, that the Western intervention are often arbitrary. I think when we go about solving that, is that we have faith that Western intervention can be good, because that when you take the steps required to actually educate yourself about that, because you believe that Western intervention can make a difference, that it can improve the lives of people, that it can actually protect the rights of people in specific situations. That is when people do the things that you want them to. I think when you have no faith in Western intervention, you don't bother trying to vote based on foreign policy. Because the only foreign policy you care about is not having Western intervention, that you should be more isolationist, that we should engage in these sort of things, that we should be more protectionist or American first. Because why would we intervene as the West? As the West, that's not our job. We shouldn't have faith in that. We should believe in other things instead. I think it's incredibly important then that we continue to have faith in Western intervention, despite the fact that yes, it has fucked up in some instances. It has made mistakes in some instances. In some instances, it has gone wrong. It hasn't gone perfectly. But I choose to believe that when we vote for the people who like it, like in this room, I think most of us probably are going to go into politics, and that's all you guys study anyway. I think I have faith that when I vote for Palmer eventually, when he was South Dublin City Council, that he is actually going to try and make a difference. He is actually going to reform the institution that he complains about. He is actually going to fix the problems that exist, because I have faith that Western intervention can be good.
You talk about Palmer's security country.
Okay, maybe not Palmer. There are also literally other people who are running for office here. And I think I have faith that when they get elected, because they will, they are going to make a difference. They are going to look into these issues. Because look, Palmer is probably correct. It's not possible for every single individual to be educated on every single conflict brought. There's also applies economic policy, right? I don't think anyone who doesn't study economics can tell you how quantitative easing works or anything. But the point of elected officials is you have faith that these elected officials will do the things you want them to. That they will do the requisite research into these conflicts, into economic policy. They will hire necessary advisors in order to understand these issues and approach these issues with a sensible mind. I think that is what I have faith in. I have faith in us. I have faith that the people in this room know enough people who are going to talk to people that are able to engage in the practice of discourse to understand the issues better and eventually build up sufficient political momentum to solve the things they talk about. Because yes, I think Western intervention sometimes is maybe not good. I think it can be a lot better. The only way we can improve it is we have faith that it can be improved, that it can be reformed, that it can be made to be consistently better. Because at the point where you have no faith in it, you throw it to the side, you break up with it, and as a result, you end up with a lot worse situations in a lot more places. Please vote opposition.
shout yay, and all those against the motion will shout nay. So to remind people to vote yay, is this House has no faith in Western interventionism, and then no is obviously the opposite. And so all those in favour say yay. Yay. And all those against say nay.
Nay.
That's my favorite text as well.
Okay. You see the ladies on? So they just shouted though. That's not Western interventionism, you just shout a little louder. Okay, so we're going to say that nay has the debate here today, and so that means that the opposition